Welcome to the Deep Dive. You know, if you're like most people, you probably pour tons of energy into starting something new, right? Sketching out the big ideas, maybe crafting that killer opening line. But today, we are diving into what might be the most critical phase, but one that often gets, well, neglected. Right, the ending. Yeah, our look into screenwriting principles, things like that, it shows this really common pattern. It doesn't matter if it's a novel, a movie script, even a big presentation for work. People put huge effort into the beginning, act one, the setup. And they get pretty good at the middle part, act two, the conflicts, the twists. But then just when they can see the finish line, it feels like they just run out of steam. That last part, act three, it often feels rushed or tacked on, or even worse, it just falls flat.
And that flat ending, it's just catastrophic, really.
Yeah.
Act three isn't just, where the story stops. It's the destination. It's what the audience has been waiting for the whole time. It's the resolution that decides what people actually take away with them. If you mess up the ending, you kind of taint everything that came before.
Right. So our mission today, let's cut through that. We've got 3 core questions, really, that the pros use. These are designed to check right away if your Act 3 is actually doing its job, if it's delivering that memorable finale that feels well-earned.
Yeah, and to really get why the ending is so vital, we should touch on a bit of psychology. There's this concept called the peak end rule. Basically, it suggests that when we remember an experience, any experience, we don't average it all out. We mostly remember 2 things: the most intense moment, the peak, and the very end.
Oh, that's fascinating, especially when you think about like a 2-hour movie or maybe a long pitch. It means that final act carries, what did the source call it, disproportionate weight. And you feel that, don't you? We've all seen movies that maybe dragged a bit in the middle or had some plot holes, but if that ending just lands perfectly, you walk out feeling satisfied. You kind of forgive the earlier bumps.
Absolutely. Or think about a presentation. Maybe you fumbled a data point halfway through, but if your final summary, your call to action is super strong and clear, people remember it positively. But a weak ending, the whole thing gets mentally filed under disappointing, no matter how good the start was.
Okay, so if it's that crucial for the overall feeling, how do we make sure we don't drop the ball right at the end? You mentioned tests. We need to put our Act 3 through like a stress test using these 3 questions. Where do we start?
Right. Question 1. It sounds simple, maybe obvious, but it gets forgotten surprisingly often when you're deep in the writing process. Does Act 3 actually answer the main story question?
The central question. Every good story sort of makes a promise, doesn't it? It sets up this big burning question, like, will the underdog team win? Can the hero save everyone? Are they finally going to get that rom-com kiss? And the audience, whether they realize it consciously or not, they're tracking that question right from the start.
Exactly. And by the time you hit Act 3, they've put in the time, the emotional energy, they've earned a payoff. The resolution has to address that main conflict head on. When you look at sequels that maybe didn't work so well, often it's because they kind of dodged the big questions set up in the first movie, left it hanging. That's unsatisfying.
That's a really good point. It's not just about winning or losing. It's about acknowledging the premise. Like, imagine a murder mystery where the detective just gives up in the last 10 minutes. Or a heist movie where the crew just walks away because the vault looks too tricky. That feels like a betrayal, almost.
It is. It's breaking that contract with the audience. And think about it in, say, a business context. If your whole presentation was about a crisis in, marketing, your final slide absolutely must answer, okay, so what are we doing about it? You need to deliver the ask, the solution. And the resolution needs to hit that sweet spot we talked about, feeling both inevitable yet surprising. Inevitable because it makes sense based on everything we've seen, but surprising in how it actually happens. Okay, so that's question 1, answering the core promise. Now, let's talk about how that answer gets delivered. Test number 2. Does Act 3 build to the most important confrontation?
Right, this is about escalation, isn't it? The sources really stress that Act 3 has to be where the stakes hit their absolute peak, their zenith. You want the audience to feel that tension getting tighter and tighter until it just snaps, like a rubber band stretched too far.
Exactly. And what's really interesting here is that confrontation doesn't always mean the biggest fight scene or the loudest explosion. It has to be the most meaningful moment. Sometimes the physical stuff is just, a symptom. The real climax might be something quiet, a devastating emotional showdown maybe, or a huge thematic choice that changes the protagonist forever.
That's such a critical distinction. Because it's easy to think, oh, the climax just needs to be the most visually spectacular scene. But like you said, sometimes the most important confrontation is internal. The hero finally facing their biggest fear or owning up to a moral mistake. And if that big emotional peak happens back in Act 2 and Act 3 is just kind of tidying up, the audience feels that drop in energy. It's anticlimactic.
That decline is the real danger zone. If the tension peaks too early, people are left wondering, why did I stick around for this part? The final confrontation, whatever form it takes, needs to be the ultimate test. It has to prove the protagonist has genuinely changed or grown. It forces them to put everything they've learned, their values, maybe even their life, right on the line. Maximum risk.
It really has to feel like the boss battle, doesn't it? You've fought the smaller enemies, learned the moves throughout the story, but this final challenge demands everything you've got, all the lessons synthesized into one make-or-break moment, which leads us perfectly into the third and maybe the most crucial question, because it's all about who is doing the fighting. Is the protagonist the one driving the resolution?
Yes. This is absolutely fundamental. Ownership. Think about it. We, the audience, have been following this character. We've invested our time, our empathy in their journey, their choices, their struggles. So it is absolutely critical that they are the one who steps up and takes charge in that final decisive moment.
Because if they don't, well, that's when you get that feeling of deus ex machina, right? Where some outside force, maybe a character who wasn't that important, or just sheer luck suddenly swoops in and fixes everything. And the experts say that just completely robs the story of its power. The victory feels unearned because the person we cared about didn't actually achieve it.
Exactly. Think about those classic examples. Frodo carrying the ring all that way. He can't just hand it off to Sam at the very end for the final act. I mean, Sam's help is vital, but the burden, the agency, it rests with Frodo. Even if he struggles or momentarily fails, the resolution has to stem directly from the protagonist's choices, their actions, maybe a significant sacrifice they make.
And this applies outside of fiction too, doesn't it? If you're presenting a big problem at work, you can't end by just saying, well, hopefully the government will sort it out next month. You've lost your agency. You, the person who owns the problem, you need to present your action plan, your solution.
Precisely. So the final check for you, listening right now, is this. Look at that critical final moment in your story or your argument or your pitch. Is your main character, your protagonist, the one making the key decision, confronting the main obstacle, taking that meaningful, often difficult action? If they're just standing on the sidelines while someone else saves the day, your ending probably feels weak. It likely needs rethinking. So wrapping this up, the big takeaway here is that a really strong Act 3 does way more than just tie up loose plot threads. It actually gives meaning to the entire journey that came before it. It elevates everything. By making sure your ending answers that central question, builds to the most vital confrontation, and keeps your protagonist firmly in the driver's seat. That's how you craft a finale that feels genuinely satisfying, powerful, and memorable.
We've basically given you a shortcut here, haven't we? A concise framework drawn straight from how the best storytellers think. Focus on these three things: the question, the confrontation, the protagonist's agency, and you can make sure whatever narrative you're building, whether it's that screenplay you're polishing or just an important email you need to send, it lands with impact. And thanks to that peak end rule, getting the ending right dramatically boosts how people remember the whole thing.
And just one final thought to leave you with, building on that last point about the protagonist driving the resolution. If that resolution must come from their difficult choices, their actions, it raises an interesting question to maybe mull over about stories or even life. What specific sacrifices were actually needed for them to get there? To achieve that goal, did they have to give up safety for freedom? Or sacrifice a relationship for a principle? And how does the price they paid ultimately change how we understand their victory? What does that final cost really mean?